We have no eyeballs.
Oh,
So there we go.
Right. Good evening. This is the policy committee meeting for the month of March. We have present at the meeting. We have Dr. Higgins from the high school. We have Dr. Peck, Dr. Lehman, Dr. Chanley, Mrs. Fabiano, Mrs. Ratner, and Mr. Zeichner. So we're going to start today with the discussion on honoring pupil achievement. We did have a discussion about this, a lengthy discussion in curriculum, and a presentation by Dr. Higgins from the high school with his recommendations. So we're going to review it again here in policy so that we can put it forward for first reading.
Thank you very much. As you have the packet in front of you, I will go through the presentation up on the board as well. As we spoke in curriculum committee meeting, we have started this discussion on honoring pupil achievement as a policy and a regulation. We've had this discussion since December as committees. And with the questions and the comments that have come up over the past couple of months, I was asked to do a deeper dive and bring some recommendations back to our committees for policies and for regulations. The one thing I think, which I really didn't talk about in curriculum, is the more I read these, the more ideas I get, the more thoughts I get. There is a lot in them. And every time I read it a little differently. And really the discrepancies, I guess you could say, or the questions come within the regulations. I think if you read the policies word for word, everyone is following the policy to their letter, definitely to their spirit, but to the letter as well. So if you look at the policy 5440, which is honoring pupil achievement, the three real tenets of that policy are listed there, and those are things that we follow. The board does recognize outstanding achievements. The board does maintain membership in the National Honor Society, and the high school does name a valedictorian and a salutatorian. If you look at the regulations as I move forward, but as you look at the regulation as I move forward, the next two slides are what is written as the regulation honor roll. We talked about a little bit in the curriculum committee was that while that stipulates very specific things for grades 5 through 8 in the high school, they are very wordy and there are some blanks in there. There are some things that I think get lost in the terminology. There is the other thing that we talked about in the curriculum committee was we kind of injected this idea of weighted grades into this discussion in the regulation and in the policy where they don't exist. Honoring pupil achievement and honor roll and principals list are based on marking period grades and marking period grades only, which are not weighted. So you can see there how wordy the honor roll regulation is. And if you compare it to the way our grading system works, which is regulation 2624, it really isn't congruent with how we grade at the high school. Now, like I've said before, we can get into discussion after discussion about how we grade and things like that, but that's not really a discussion for this time. If you do look at the pupils, the principals list on the next slide, this is really where the questions started to come. The original presentation that I gave to the committee, I believe I gave it to both committees, was that the way we have been using the principals list in the high school is not 100% what is written in the regulation. The caveat there where a grade of 85 or better in honors courses will also qualify for the principals list is not something that the high school has been practicing. And they have not been practicing that since it originally changed 17 years ago. That's kind of where the questions came into play. That's where we started to talk about things like weighted grades, which technically an 85 would not be a weighted grade for the honors level. What we did discover since that time was that this was most likely a template upgrade from Strauss Esme that was just kind of either overlaid or adopted by the board, and kind of definitely does not go into practice that we have been doing at the high school. The recommendations that I have given in the past and that I continue to give are on the next slide. That would be to update Regulation 5440 to enroll. And again, I speak for the high school only. I do not speak for the middle school or any other level within the district. Students in grades 9 through 12 must achieve an average of over an overall 85 average to be an honor roll. One of those grades within that 85 average can fall between a 75 and a 79, but more than one cannot. So the overall average has to be an 85 and one grade can fall below 80 to make honor roll. To make principals list, students in grade 9 through 12 must achieve an average of an overall 90. All grades must be 90 or higher to make principals list. This is, again, based on marking period grades only, which are not weighted. This is the current practice at the high school and is in step with other school districts in the area. I do have that link to data that I have from other school districts in the area. It's pretty rudimentary. And if anybody would like to see that, I can show that to you as well. And that is consistent with schools that honor pupil achievement. Not all schools do that. Not all schools have policies on that, or do they have honor rolls or principals lists or class ranks. Very interestingly, we had an in-depth conversation at the curriculum committee about the regulation, about how we don't necessarily follow that one caveat in that regulation. Over the past couple of weeks and months, as I've been looking into this deeper, I did look at the policy and the regulation for class rank. That is the policy and the regulation that indicates weighted grades. The class rank policy, which is 5430, we do follow that based on the tenets that are in that policy. The board authorizes a system of class ranking, which we do, and we have weighted credit for honors and AP level with a minimum of 70 credits to be counted for that.
Can I ask a quick question about that slide?
Class rank slide? Or the one
No, the one
prior?
right before, that you had just there. So on this.
This is the recommendation from the high school.
Okay, so this is different than the revised
So I put the
regulation.
draft,
That
so
question.
the draft that's in the confidential was, or not confidential, in the executive content was what Dr. Higgins and I worked on in the elementaries for the previous meeting.
The high school is not
Okay.
updated.
Right. So I just uploaded this because we're bringing these recommendations now. We will adjust because we also have to take a look at the middle and the elementary now. They're
Right.
open to change, but they want to know where the high school's gonna land. They don't want to commit to the high school and that
Mhm.
threshold until they found out what it was. So,
Okay.
We want to continue to be respectful of each area.
Right, I agree. I was just.
I have a question also. If this gets approved, when are we looking to put it into effect? Immediately? Or,
So it's kind of an interesting
yeah,
question because the answer would be yes, because it's exactly what we do now,
okay.
right? It's what we've been doing.
Mhm.
So we would not change anything. We're kind of, and that's really where wrapping your head around this, we're asking you to change the regulation to follow the practice.
Right.
And the
Not
policy
vice
we are
versa.
following.
The policy is followed, right? The
Yeah.
policy is very broad.
And if I could just one more follow-up. I know 3 of 5 of you on the board already heard the presentation.
Yeah.
So, sorry, guys, I'm sure again.
Okay.
I know this is talking about like honors and AP. There's no, I guess, additional consideration is, and I know you're only speaking here for high school. With middle school, which I know you said we're gonna kind of go back, it mentioned something about like the honors and advanced courses can have a lower grade. Is that?
so that's what we talked about in curriculum in terms of standardizing and being consistent with potentially whatever was the outcome from the high school.
Okay.
So if 90 was the threshold, 90 would be the threshold at middle school and elementary.
Right, so I'm reading right now because I did come prepared, and the principal's list in middle school is 90 in every course. During the regular school, they were 85% in the advanced. Right now, the only advanced courses that we have is mathematics, and of course, now we have ELA, and we're very excited that we are now going to have science. The recommendation would be, and I think the consensus of the curriculum, because I can't speak to this,
Right.
was that it should be the same. It should be 90 because we feel if you're a child who takes a more academic rigorous class, it's because you have the capability and therefore your grade should be reflective of your capability and therefore it should be 90. So the recommendation would be, because that's the only thing we have to change in the middle school, is that 85 would now be removed and it would be 90% in every course.
Okay, so my other question is gonna be which math courses, because in some places it says algebra 1 for that, but in other places it.
Well, that would be all,
geometry,
that would be
but
all, it'd be all cleaned up, it would be moot. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So when getting into class rank, and this is where they talk about weighted and unweighted grades, so I did a deep dive into this. We follow the policy, the way the policy is spelled out. The Board of Education follows the policy. When we get into the regulation, I learned something, and I kind of talked about this a little bit as we learn policy as we grow. We learn policy as we work here throughout the years. I've been here since 2008, and all of the policies, you know, they come and they change, and you learn, and as you move on. When we look at weighted grades, what I learned as the weighted grade policy is you take an honors class, you get a weighted grade, you get extra 8 points for your GPA rank. If you take an AP course, you get an extra 10 points for your weighted GPA in your class rank. That's not necessarily true according to the regulation. According to the regulation, only the core classes should be getting those honors weighted. So any honors business course, any honors visual arts, any honors performing arts should not, according to the regulation, get those honors weighted credits.
But they do.
They
And that was
do.
that.
We have been doing that. I don't know when, like, this is something I just really learned. In my belief, all of the honors classes should have gotten it. What I understood it to be is when this regulation was enacted, we did not have honors levels courses in business and music and art. So my suggestion to the policy committee too would be to change that regulation as well. To simply read on the next slide, students in honor levels classes receive 8 points for calculations of class rank. Students in advanced placement courses receive 10 points for calculations of class rank. And that's where it stipulates that the weighted grades are for class rank and class rank only. When we talk about honor rolls and principals list, that is your marking period grades, which are not weighted. Finally, I was asked to talk a little bit about National Honor Society. Like I said, this before, this was not a part of my original presentation, so I kind of just looked at this over the past couple of days. Currently, in the high school, juniors can apply after their first semester, and seniors can apply after their first marking period. Those who are applying, or those who are invited to apply, must attain a weighted average of 90 by the end of that period. Okay, that's the way it is currently. All right, yeah, I'm sorry.
I didn't want to interrupt,
That's okay.
because you mentioned that the weighting only is for GPA and class rank in senior year, but then this,
Excellent question. That is
I was wanting to
absolutely
set you up
correct.
to explain, so.
So what I'm saying is the regulation for class rank is the regulation that says it should only be used for GPA, right? What the National Honor Society, which we are affiliated with, it allows schools to manipulate the requirements for their particular school. At some point, when creating requirements for the National Honor Society, someone said we should use weighted grades. So I talked about this a little bit at the curriculum committee meeting. If you look at the class rank section, it's titled academic incentive programs. So a lot of these regulations were enacted when Monroe was a different type of school, where we were incentivizing a lot of these academic programs, whether it be National Honor Society or honors classes or AP classes, where you had maybe 15, 20 kids in National Honor Society. This year, we're gonna have 375 kids. It's
Not-
more than half of
not
the senior class,
Mhm.
which is a little much.
Mhm.
Not only is it a little much for the school, it's a little much for the advisors too.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
And these are truly indicative of the elite that should be.
Correct, right? So, this differs now. I did misspeak
Okay.
in the curriculum committee meeting, where I said the National Honor Society standards are a flat 375. That was not their standards. That was an average standard for the schools in the area. That was
Okay.
my mistake. The non-weighted was the standard for the national.
So we need to change it to what the standard is for the
So-
honor society.
So the
Non-weighted.
recommendation for the high school is still the same that is on here. In speaking with advisors, over the years and speaking with, the people that have run the club, their recommendation is instead of that weighted 90, it just be a flat 90.
Well, let me just stop you for a second about recommended. One of the things that I could talk in middle school, why we don't have national, okay? If it's a national honor society and they don't use weighted, and we follow their standards, we pay their fee, we're affiliated with them, we should also do what they do, correct?
Correct, except for the fact that they actually have, they have a notation in there about the minimum that is expected, but they have the caveat where schools can then require higher minimum.
But you're not required to hire, you're making it easier.
Yeah.
No, their actual minimum is very low.
No, that's what the number, so the word weighted.
Well, correct, yes.
Because when you weight it, you're actually lessening the,
We also have to understand the weighted is, if we think about this, the weighted is a Monroe thing, right? Not all schools weight.
no, I
Not all
know, I
schools
keep
do.
this on weighted though.
Yeah.
National Honor Society is not going to use the term weighted
Okay,
because it's not something that schools do.
so is your recommendation different, because when you left the last committee, which was good, because you gave us information.
So my recommendation stays the same. However, at the last committee, at the curriculum committee, after I did misspeak,
Okay.
and I said the National Honor Society standard was a flat 3.75, which is about a 92. The curriculum committee meeting wanted to go with that standard. However, I misspoke.
Okay,
So my recommendation is still what's on this list,
okay,
would be a non-weighted 90
okay, okay.
instead of the non-weighted 92.
We just want to make sure we get all this information, right?
Is there a reason we're the only ones that weight averages?
So schools do weight for GPA purposes.
Oh.
And if you investigate the way grades happen, what I can tell you is that we are really one of the only school districts around that do a 100 average. Everybody else does a 4.0 average. And those are called quality points.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we get into a lot of confusion with that because when schools grade, they grade on, A, B, C, D, 100, all that stuff. All of those grades are then equivalent to quality points.
Mm-hmm.
Those quality points are then weighted for AP and honors. That's why you can get something above a 4.
So they're getting a double weight.
So they're not, because they're not getting weighted on their grades, they're getting weighted on their quality points.
So, but we weight on the grades. So here's my question.
We don't have quality points.
Right, so we weight only on the grades, but when they go to colleges, don't they convert that to look at the quality points
So
out of a 4?
they convert a lot of different things. What they usually do, from my understanding, is they convert it to take the weight out.
Oh, okay.
They will convert to take the weight out. Because they're gonna look at, in our school, right? You have a graduate that goes to a college, the college is looking at their transcript, and they have a 97.5 GPA. Their GPA is 97.5, but their grades are all 85s, right?
Yeah.
Because they're or 85s or 87s.
Because they're weighted.
They automatically know that all of those grades are weighted. But what they do look at is AP.
The quality and the
right?
integrity of the class, academic rigor that they took.
They're also looking at if you're taking college prep classes and getting 90s in the
Mhm.
college prep classes, they're also taking that into account. So,
So
like I said, we could have these conversations for days
Yeah.
about the need for weighted or the positives of weighted or the detriment of a weighted
Mhm.
grade or the 4.0 scale versus the 100 scale.
Mhm.
And I can see Ms. Seidrich, he's shaking, he's ready to argue with me here.
Yes.
No, I think he agrees with you.
Yeah, I think he agrees.
my question though then is like, now for National Honor Society, and I can understand wanting to make the criteria more challenging. I think having over half is a lot, pretty, but this then would take a lot of those students that are taking those higher rigor courses, which I know you're saying, like, it wouldn't start until like the next freshman class. But, I know that a lot of those students tend to be, I mean, I will use love as an example. I was that kid who tried to do a lot of AP and honors classes, and I wasn't getting the same level grades as I would have in, like a college prep course, if you will. But at the same time, then like those students that are in that situation where they're like, well, I'm gonna challenge myself and I'll get
Mhm.
an eight, you know, I'll get a lot of 85s. Those students would no longer be eligible for National Honor Society
Right.
with 85.
But that's-
AP history. as opposed to-
That's the choice they make, and I think the comment that you made earlier of when you were not being PC, which is,
I did, and I didn't mean to say
and
it.
I'm gonna say it because I'm not PC, so there you go. Are your classes and your grades for learning, growth, which is big, we're big into growth, right, growth mindset, or is it for a grade? Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? Do I think anybody should take a class that is beyond their ability and get a C if it's beyond their ability? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends on where you're at. But I do feel very passionate where I know Dr. Higgins does also. If you're on this level, then you should be in classes on this level. If you're on this level, then your class is this level. And if you get a lower grade in this class, but you're on the level where you belong there, so be it. It's not any different in the work history. When you go to work every day, there's different ways, different jobs that you do. Some people do an easier job, a harder job. They work harder. You say, well, look what I had to do all day. Someone says, well, I didn't have a hard job. Well, they don't make the same amount of money. They don't have the same prestige. They don't have the same degrees. That's just the nature of it. I can make an argument either way. I'm not necessarily a person, that's a conversation for another time, the way it is. To me, a grade is a grade is a grade. And I do feel, the only thing I do feel, which was what Gonzalo brought up, which I was very, when I flipped my opinion at the last meeting, and now I'm kind of flipping back, is I do believe, though, that you shouldn't be limited to not get principal's list if you get an 85, because then does it pertain to the child who's in the top 10? And according to your research, that's not the case. Children that are becoming summa magna in the top 10 or 20, they're getting those 90, 95s. They're getting above and beyond because they can take the academic rigor because they're that bright. That's why we differentiate. Why do we differentiate? Because you have children of all different learning levels in the classroom. And they should, what do we always say to a child? A C is a good grade if that's your very best. If you go to class and you do the very, very best you can, legitimately, in your study habits, in your ability to synthesize information, and you have a C, it's an average grade. It has become a dirty grade. It has become a word that we don't say anymore. But when I grew up, a C was an average grade, and if you worked hard and that's what you got, you were an average student. And then if you were in a class where you could take the academic rigor, you went into the honors. You know, I'm so glad now you just can't take whatever class you want, because there should be a minimum expectation that someone can handle the class, which we talked about, which has gone in a very good direction.
I also.
Yeah, so I don't want to get off topic.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
With the
We're running out of time.
with the National Honor Society portion of this policy, my concern though is we've also been trying to achieve, you know, greater, I don't want to say word because that's not, like those stuff that is handled through AP, the AP, I forgot what they're called, the group that handles AP.
College
the
board.
scores that we get, right?
College
Because I think
College boards.
from bronze, you know, to silver. And I definitely understand, and I think we are all in agreement that students should take the courses that they are on that level for. But is this going to take a student where they're, you know, they're like, well, I really would like to be in National Honor Society, I think it's important to me. And then those students are not challenging themselves to be in those courses because they would be concerned that their grades would no longer be weighted for the purposes of a National Honor Society and things like that, where they say, well, I want to make sure I get into National Honor Society, so I would rather take an quote easier class so that I'm getting a 90 and above, as opposed to an AP course where I might get an 85, I might learn a lot more, but then I may be ineligible for this, which has been discussed.
But then that would backfire on the students that want that academic rigor. They want to take those high level courses because they want to apply to college and be seen as taking AP biology, AP history. So I think in that scenario, I can't imagine any student that has the academic ability to take those high level courses, not put themselves in the appropriate course that they really belong in academically because of National Honor Society. If that's the case, I don't think they're making good choices. Yeah. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and again, we could have these conversations, putting a lot of labels on things.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? I think if, in your scenario, I think that child is forcing themselves to be appropriately placed too.
Mhm.
So, I think there is very good discussion. I think the way it is right now, and that's, I believe, regulations should be a living document too. These are things that you can change with your population and the way your school is. I think the way it is right now, it's not challenging enough.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question with the regulation. do other districts have these qualifications in their regulations? I tried to look at other surrounding districts. Most districts can have their regulations online and all policies. But I guess in terms of it sort of changing with the population, is it something that's more like handled at the, a school level and not necessarily has a regulation where we just say, we will at minimum follow, sort of what the policy says, follow what the National Honor Society says, but the criteria would be set by the administration as opposed to being detailed in the regulation.
So I can tell you from my research over the past couple of weeks is that every school district is different. Most school districts' regulations are not as detailed as ours.
Just,
I wasn't gonna give you permission.
if you could clarify just 2 points for me. The first point is, so you're recommending a National Honor Society, you're saying 90%?
Correct.
Okay,
Unweighted, non-weighted,
okay, 90% on
average non-weighted.
non-weighted, okay. And, the current population you have that are in the National Honor Society is really 375, and that's right, as you.
Roughly,
It
yes.
is a bit. Look at, you have kind of a unique population of kids, I believe, within the school system in terms of their demands. And so my question to you is this, in terms, have you looked at that population and to see where they fall as a group in terms of maybe the mode, the medium, the means, just get an idea statistically?
So I have not done that. The one thing I can tell you is that we looked at what this population would look like if we made this change.
What would the
And
number
it would
be?
be about 100 less students,
Which is appropriate.
Yeah, about 100 what?
100 less
Oh,
students.
okay,
That's appropriate.
yeah, that is.
That's really appropriate, because
Yeah.
whatever the percentage is, when you have 650 kids, right?
Yeah.
That's appropriate.
680,
That's what I was
right now,
looking for.
680, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right,
it's good.
thank you. So we'll have the.
Yes, we'll do is,
And you're gonna collaborate with the middle school and the elementary
Yes.
school?
yeah, and I mean, if the, my recommendation is, if we're not doing weighting in the high school regarding principals list and regarding, honor roll, my recommendation is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you're not going backwards. Elementary, I know sometimes it's different, but the purpose of middle school is to get you ready for high school.
And Mrs. Gasco says she would have data regarding the 5th grade.
Yeah, so I think 5th grade, what we'll do is we'll have a conversation with the elementary principals, because right now they get 10 points, which I think is just drastically way too much. They get 10 points.
Yeah,
And I think the other thing we want to just discuss as a committee, before we go forward with this, is the dates. Remember, we talked a little bit about the dates and curriculum, so this should be not anybody this year. Every child's already in school, right? This year would not be fair, we want to be fair. So do we want to start with the class of 2029?
That was the recommendation.
this is for National Honor Society.
Correct.
The other stuff, it's already, we're doing it.
So it'll be September 1st
Uh-huh.
will be the appropriate change that everybody will follow.
2025.
You got it.
National Honor.
We agree? Does that make sense, everybody?
Dr. Chandler, I know you wanted to discuss the middle school honor society.
I have the information already.
Because I was gonna say, if they're doing non-weighted for high school, like I have that there are certain courses that are weighted
Okay.
at middle school.
I need to speak first about the middle school because I think it's very important. If you already got 1 week.
Wait, go ahead.
You
We're
good?
talking about, what are you talking about? Like,
National, exactly, middle school, I'm sorry. So one of the things I need to point out, and I hope parents are watching, and this is very important, is the middle school is not a National Honor Society. I personally started the Middle School National Honor Society 11 years ago, myself. And the reason why I did it was because I felt that we had the right population, which at the time should only be 10% of your grade, 10 or 20% tops, not 50%, as what we're seeing. And when I started it, we were part of the National Honor Society for the middle school chapter. We paid dues, we followed all of their regulations. We started to find out, and you're gonna laugh, we started to find out that the regulations were so tough that when parents were pushing back, because we had more stringent requirements at the middle school than the high school. So parents were bringing us the information and saying, this is not fair, this is ridiculous. So we changed the Honor Society to MTMS Honor Society. We follow no guidelines of national, no guidelines of the state. We follow our own guidelines. It is not part of the policy. There is no regulation, there's no policy on purpose. Because tomorrow, If we went ahead and put out a posting for MTMS Honor Society, it's the basis of a club, and nobody wanted to do it, it is not a requirement. There is no policy that says you must have an honor society like you have in the high school. We do not have that. It is not a requirement. So what we did was, we went ahead and said, you look perplexed.
I was just, because I know it's definitely more common for high schools to have a National Honor Society, but
No, I'm gonna let you know. I did my homework.
it's
You
a
ready?
requirement for every high school to have a National Honor Society.
In our policy, I'm talking about our policy. Our policy has a requirement to have a National Honor Society.
That's different than
Right.
like.
But the reason why my recommendation would not be to make it a policy is because realistically, and I'm looking for my notes I have at schools, realistically, if you don't have an advisor, you don't have a program. There is no this is not middle school, so we went ahead and did it. East Brunswick does not have one. We did the research. South Brunswick does not have one. And I apologize because I had it stapled and I lost my notes. So East Brunswick does not have one, South Brunswick does not have one, Freehold does not have one, Manalapan has one. I asked them to send it to me, I'm looking, I apologize, I thought I stapled it. I'll pull it up on my phone. So what I did was I looked to 7 schools in our neighboring district to see. And I'll get it for you right now. So one of the things that I think is that the middle school, there's pluses and minuses. And what we were talking about before was middle school pedagogy. Charles had brought up, which I totally agree, and I'm middle school all the way, I believe middle school for many, many, many years, right? In middle school, we're trying to encourage the kids emotionally, socially, academically, to put forth the best effort, to get comfortable, to be in teams. When I brought the National Honor Society, it was actually becoming a negative. And that is why we got rid of it and went to the Monroe Township Middle School Society. I don't think, it has to be driven by interest of an advisor. You cannot make anyone do it. If you make it a policy, and we do not have anybody who wants to be the advisor, you do not have it.
Would that be true of a high school as well, though? If
No, because we'd have to assign someone and or someone else would have to take it over, even if it was an administrator. If it's in the policy, you have to have it.
I don't know, we've never.
We never experienced that.
Clubs with that, not with the National Honor Society.
Wait, I'm gonna tell you the name of the schools.
I'll-
Us around, here it is, us surrounding schools, Manalapan has a national junior, Marlboro has none. East Brunswick has none. South Brunswick has none. Freehold has none to our knowledge, and Millstone has a national. So I just picked surrounding districts. The bottom line is,
Talking about middle school level.
only middle school.
Yes.
This is pure middle school. I don't want to place a burden unless we verify the necessity. So when you look at the Honor Society, we have other programs in the middle school because Honor Society shouldn't just be about grades, it's about leadership. It's about service. And we have those other organizations, we have those other clubs. If this board recommended, the board said, we really feel passionate that we should have it as part of the policy, I think we need to put in the word may, which we're gonna talk about in the next, rather than shall, because there is never a guarantee. I have personally called people in my office to say, yeah, I need to do this for me, otherwise I'm gonna do it. Because we went years with people not wanting to do it. And I think we have to make very clear, aloud, it is not a National Honor Society.
right, no, but it is a middle school honor society.
It is a Monroe Township Middle School Honor Society, that is correct.
I guess my question, though, because you had experienced this, is from what I know, and as an 8th grade parent, I just seen the criteria for myself. So like, it's just probably because I was surrounded by a lot of community members who learned about it this year. My understanding is that the requirements for the middle school are harder than the high school.
Well, I have them in front of me, 90% or better as a final grade in all 7th grade classes.
Right. But then also 90% or better as a first marking period grade in all 8th grade classes.
Okay.
So I guess my question for that would be, if you are a student who has an average of a 96, but you have one class like social studies where you got an 89 your first marking period in
Okay.
8th grade, then to me, it's just,
What are yours for the National Honor Society? Yours is an overall average?
So it would be an average, so that
Right.
would be fine.
Mhm.
That student would get into the National Honor
but
Society.
not in middle school. In middle school, they
So-
wouldn't, because it says a 90 or
In
better
order, as a final grade.
for 7th grade. But then it also says 90 or better as marking period 1 grade in 8th grade.
So that would be an average of your grades? or
Just for every.
in all your classes in eighth grade.
So,
I mean, that's the way it reads for principals list. This doesn't.
And I think that's probably where they got it from.
Right, that's what we're asking it to read for principals. list.
That's what you're asking it to read. And I
For
do,
the National Honor Society, it would be an average.
yeah, I think what had happened was, if I recall this correctly, this is different than the way we had it worded years ago, but we wound up getting 300 and 400 people in it. If you're making something a society and you're saying it's standing out, you have to have rigorous, high-level criteria. I feel very passionate about that.
I
And-
totally agree.
and I'll be honest with you-
Like, why not just do the average of
So if some,
all 5 years?
You want it to be consistent with
Like,
the high.
why is it, like, if you get a
if you
90
want to change it to the high school, but I'm telling you, all we're doing is changing that on paper because there is no policy. So we can go back to the middle school and say, in efforts to, which I agree with, in efforts to have consistency from middle school to high school, we're going to be changing the language. I do think though, however, I don't have yours in front of me. I think if you get a 70 in any class, or 75, you're done. Even if you're average, because if you're smart enough, you could have an average of 90, but if you have a class, an honor society student should not be getting a 70 or a 75 in a class.
like for the 1 marking period, you mean? Because technically, with the 7th grade, they could get a 75 in 1 marking period, what I'm saying, because it would still be the average of the final, right? It would be the average of the final grade.
What I will do is I will work with, Dr. Lehman and Dr. Higgins and the other Dr. Higgins, and I will work it to have it match. But I do think then we are getting rid of the 85%.
Right, because you just said that when it was 90, you
Well,
was too
then,
many.
I know, but I'm trying to be respectful of
No, I know,
fashion.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, was it, when it was 90, it was too many, 90?
we had I don't remember, I don't have it in front of me, I mean, I haven't been in that job in 4 years, but I'm just saying, from my recollection, they went ahead and made it a little bit more stringent,
Right.
because you were having, realistically, if you were to look it up, I guess I could ask AI, realistically, if you have 650 students in a class, you shouldn't have more than 20% of the student population being these elite.
I agree. My only request, and whether or not we include it in the policy, which I can understand what you're saying.
There is no policy right now, let's make sure.
Regarding not having it in the policy is what I was trying to say, but I also feel like I think you had said this several times, like, we look at us and what Monroe wants, but, that's obviously a decision we can make, it's just whether or not it's the average of, so that it's a 90 and above, not if a student is sick the first marking period of 8th grade, but they've been a phenomenal student, that's then held against them if they get an 89 in 1 class when they've gotten 97 to 98 across the board.
So we'll look at the honor society to read, so it matches
R would be for the straight 90 average.
straight 90 average.
The other-
So if a child gets a 65 in a class, they can make National Honor Society.
If they have a 90 average.
But
I-
honor society is not just considering their grades though, right?
Oh, yes, you have to do leadership, and yes, absolutely.
We have National Junior Honor Society, they had to have a community service, they had to.
Yes, we do that too. They have to write an essay, they have to do all that, right? Yes. No, we have it also, but the grades is what sets you, because if you don't have the grades, the other stuff is moot.
Right.
Now, my next question is, then any weighted, 85% or better for those students in advanced ELA or math would then be removed?
If we're matching,
Weighted. They have also weighted, because we're not doing it for the high school.
I would agree.
if we're matching.
Yeah,
The other
we
thing
should
that
match.
we have to take into consideration is how grades are assigned in the
Mhm.
middle school as compared to the high school.
Yeah.
With all due respect, I think it's a little easier to get a 90 in middle school.
So do I, and that's why I was comfortable making it harder, but, I mean,
I think it even increased the average grade, I just think it should still be an average.
But I think that's why.
what's the average, would be 95?
That's above my pay grade.
So, because if you wanted my recommendation is I would go for the way it reads and remove the weighting completely. And I would leave it, because I do agree.
You could even say 92.
A 90% in middle school in an academic class
92 or
is less rigorous than a 90% in a high school.
Yeah.
So therefore, the 90 to me is I have a problem, and this is, because I know I'm being recorded, this is my personal, like we say, this is my opinion. I'm not the end all be all, that's why we have committees, right? I'm just giving my opinion. In my opinion, the middle school honor society, just like in elementary, the grades are even easier than middle school than high school, right? The natural progression, of the level of difficulty. To me, if someone got a 75 in a class,
In 1 marking period.
to me, I don't think that's the criteria for an honor society. But that's just my opinion. I know a lot of parents would disagree with me. I'm sure many of them watching them. I'm giving Sherry's opinion. Now, when I make my decisions, it's not based upon Sherry's opinion. It's based upon what is best for all of our children, getting input from all of our committee members, matching them to high school, which I think is important. So I'm comfortable with making those concessions, because that's what you do as a leader. But I'm letting you know that I like it, that maybe it should read similar, so maybe it should mirror the honor roll, where you can have an average, but you can only have one grade of 75 or less, where you give that person the out if they were sick, type of thing. So maybe the language should then mirror what they do for honor roll and make middle school its own in that regard. But I want to be respectful of the fact that we're trying to also have a progression to the high school.
Because I know I made like the request to look into this, the reason for not putting this in the policy is just because then we would be required to have it.
And yes,
Right,
and
we need
we're
an
not.
advisor.
Yeah.
And we're not required to have, right, but we're not required to have,
A junior.
I think we should.
You are.
Our policy says it, right now our policy does not say a junior.
Right.
My question is, why, because we've had this for so many years, why wouldn't we add that knowing that we've had it for so many years? And it's just because of the advice.
Have be an advisor, right?
Yes, so I created it, I can actually make the statement, it's not a we. I actually went to the superintendent and said, I would like to join the National Junior Honor Society, because we didn't have one, because at the time, we had an elite number of children that I felt needed to be recognized. Then as we went up in over the years, right, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, we started getting hundreds, so we wanted to change the criteria. First, the criteria was too strict, then the criteria was too, because what did you say, a living document? Was too simple. If you want to put it in there, I would be very careful, because you have to remember, we do clubs and we do our activities very different than the high school. They do things for free for 1 year, there's no payment. We pay every club advisor from the moment they start a club. Things are not, they're not completely, it's not completely exactly the same in middle school and high school.
Right.
And I feel that if we didn't have an advisor and we had it, that we had to have it, then probably one of the VPs would have to do it. I don't know what else we said, right? If it's required to have one, like, I don't mean anything bad, but let's be honest, if you didn't have an advisor, I'd be looking at you and saying, is it Mr. Clover?
I said I'd take this stipend.
You do it. No stipend, you don't get paid. But you see what I'm trying to say? We have to be careful. And the other thing is, I really also believe that, you know, there may be a time and a place where maybe it's not appropriate in middle school. You know, middle school is about building the whole child, and it's about social and emotional understandings and norms. At the time, we had a small elite group of kids that I thought were appropriate to be recognized, and that's why I instituted it. And be careful what you institute, because what happened was it became the same thing that's going on in high school. What's my rank? What's my grade? And that's not what we want to foster in middle school. So perhaps I even had this conversation with Dr. Higgins. Every year that goes by, maybe it's not appropriate. You know, maybe that's why a lot of middle schools don't do it. I don't know. It really depends. At the time, like I said, when I created it, it was an elite group that got recognized in that particular area because they were so exceptional. And then it became 340, 400, and then I don't know. I can go either way with this conversation. My recommendation would not be to make it a policy. I will let you know that.
All right.
That would be my recommendation. But I have no problem looking at the criteria. And we don't have to worry about bringing it back. I mean, we'll bring it back as a discussion. We don't have to worry about it being policy as far as first read, second read, how's that?
No.
It could be a discussion,
Yes.
okay?
I want to move on.
Yeah, so,
because we have-
yeah, go right ahead.
We're over.
Yeah, can we just wrap this? I just want.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we ended
Yeah.
on,
I do agree that it should be consistent with the high school.
That's
Like, our
fine.
whole theme has been consistency with, you know, setting forth the
Yep.
student achievement policy and whatnot, that if we're looking to maintain the difference between the
Okay.
middle school honor society and the high school, to again, keep that consistency going forward, just so students know what to look for.
sure.
But I do agree with what Dr. Higgins said, that it's not as difficult.
Correct, I agree
like,
also, but it's, but you're still setting the parameters of, okay, if it's 90 in middle school, it's also gonna be 90 in high school, but is it more difficult to get a 90 in high school?
Sure.
Certainly, but it's still the same parameter.
Okay. I have no problem with that. I wrote myself notes already.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to move on, yes, code of conduct.
So one of the things that were asked before to BG and T, and then we had the conversation I asked, and I thought it was appropriate for policy is the code of conduct. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we made revisions in general to the code of conduct, so this is not just Buzz, correct?
That was going to be my first
Yes,
question.
yes.
How often do you review and revise the codes of conduct?
So what you have in front of you are
Mhm.
what's in play this year.
Okay,
The elementary has some revisions that they'd like to share.
Mhm.
That is not included here because they didn't want to confuse us with what some of the suggestion revisions are
Oh.
versus what's actually in action.
Okay,
Again, none of this is in the regulation or policy. These are in the student
Handbooks.
revised at the building level, so kind of pertains to the discussion about the specificity of a regulations and living documents, but,
can you tell me what page on the elementary I can look at?
What do you want, do you want to look at the whole thing or you want to look at the bus?
No, just the bus, right?
yeah, down
Okay.
about page,
Yeah,
down about page,
so I have that here in front of me as well.
Thank you.
I think, is it 10, maybe?
Page 11, it's page 11, 13.
Of the elementary,
Yeah, yes, I think the elementary's first, correct?
that's what I'm looking for,
Yeah, I have them tabbed around.
10.
So. Is elementary first?
Okay, yes, page 10, right on the top, school bus disciplinary procedures.
Okay, I'm on the wrong thing then, because I have page 11.
They're looking at the-
You're looking at policy,
No, I'm not looking at regulation.
they're looking-
no,
I'm sorry.
the elementary.
Okay. Okay. Oh, look at that, I had a little tip.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so, constant, we have,
Page 10,
student violations of the above guidelines will be reported to the appropriate school administrator by the bus driver or the school official who's witnessing the infraction in school discipline, suspension of bus privileges if students suspend the bus and shall be the responsibility of the parent. That's the only thing we have at school bus disciplinary. I will let you know, I had a meeting today with the director of transportation, and one of the things that I have set up, which I think will work very well, is that no bus infraction report will go to the school until a designated person in the transportation department has confirmed that the information is correct. Student name, driver name, bus number, and the specific infraction, because what we get from bus drivers is whole bus, and they turn it in. No students at the stops on time, and they turn it in. So I had a meeting with her today, and I said, when you're dealing with bus drivers, and I even went to a bus driver meeting to have this conversation, when we want to hold children accountable to an appropriate, safe behavior, you need to write down specifically what the infraction was, what it was that they did that was misconduct. You need to have the date, the time, the student's name, and the bus driver's name. So she agreed. So, yeah, student advice, so this is not,
So I think the way the elementary code of conduct, it highlights, if you scroll up to page 9, the page above it, that's the student guidelines and expectations, right?
yeah.
And it has different areas. There's another one for cafeteria expectations and things like that. The way the consequences and the behaviors are addressed at the elementary level are consistent no matter where it is. If you throw something in the lunchroom, if you throw something in the classroom, if you throw something on the bus, if you throw it on the playground, if you scroll down to where the consequences which is down on page 15, 16, they're handled the same way, right? So the consequences in the chart is the same.
page 17.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit, 16, 17. So those are where your infractions are. And then there's a caveat of the administrator based on a student's prior conduct. Again, in other areas, right? If you're having issues with a student in the classroom and you're providing consequences in the classroom, we would also consider that, take that into consideration if it happens on the playground or in the lunchroom or in the gymnasium. So,
But overall,
basically the bus piece is basically saying, these are the student expectations. Here's some of the things we could do. We could address it this way or that way, but the specificity of them is consistent with managing behaviors anywhere else.
Just looking at it quickly though, I don't see any consequences, like I see the key here at the bottom.
Yep.
BPS for bus privilege suspended, removal of privilege bus, VC contract, but I don't see any of those codes in any of the consequences.
But what's great,
For the elementary.
Right, so
Vandalism.
Yeah, only for vandalism. I'm just thinking in terms of like, if you have, if there is a bus infraction,
And I-
right, we don't, then.
Now that we're looking at this, I also wanted to make a comment that I don't think, like, all the codes are not consistent. You know, like the high school bus code of conduct is not consistent with the middle school and the elementary, for example.
Correct.
Right. And even other things, like something serious, like substance use at the middle school and substance use at the high school are different consequences. Like, so
Correct.
that,
Correct.
that's not consistent.
No, I think
Wouldn't
it's not.
they be different though? Because
Yes.
they're different?
They are supposed to be different.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're looking
I
at,
think like a younger child that found using drugs would be a very, like, you know, the parents should be called, they should go see it.
Well, they are, yeah, so.
Okay.
Oh. But the out of school is different.
yeah, there's
They're
definitely a
not
different
suspended,
approach.
yeah.
There's definitely a different approach at the elementary, the middle, and the high school.
Yes.
Restorative
Okay.
justice pieces that
Yes.
go through. And again, this is what's in play now. They have some recommendations, even in the bus piece. They had, again, this is coming from, they did the work last spring.
Yep.
They got it to us. What we do is we have the parents sign off on the code of conduct before school year starts. So we had already signed off on this year's code of conduct. So instead of rolling out a new one, we're gonna present it to you guys this year for implementation.
September.
Can I ask one quick
Yeah.
question? It mentions that there could be a suspension or potentially like a removal of privileges I saw in the older grades.
Mhm.
And I know like last year when we had the additional spending question, we had a discussion about like, we are required by the state to provide transportation for 2 miles for certain grade levels and 2.5 miles for the high school. Are, like, is there something in the, at the state level that excludes us from that?
So the way it works,
There's-
that's an excellent question. So the way it works is if you're a special education child, you may not have your privileges removed. Conversation over. That
Okay.
is a requirement. If you are a regular education child, you cannot indefinitely remove someone unless you followed, so for example, they have different levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. So you get a bus contract, and then maybe you get lunch detention, depending upon what it is, or you can get after-school detention, in-school suspension, removal from the bus. To my knowledge, to my knowledge, a regular education child who has broken the code of conduct can be removed from the bus for an extensive amount of time. That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And I think you brought up a good point. Nothing is in isolation. So if you misbehave, if you're a child, unfortunately, who makes bad choices, you're making bad choices during the day, and you're making those bad choices in the bus, they don't say, and we have had some parents try and say this, well, that's the first time they ever got in trouble on the bus, but they were suspended 3 other times.
Mhm.
So what we like to teach the child is the moment you walk out of your front door to the moment you walk in the front door, you will follow the code of conduct. So that means on the bus stop, walking to the bus stop, in the building, out of the building. So the code of conduct, which is very important because it really is important for us to be able to have that. The bus, we make the joke, I used to say, is another classroom. The bus is another classroom.
Mhm.
For any special needs student.
Special
Anyone
needs
with an
student, I confirmed with,
Manifestation
of the disability. I confirmed with Marietta.
Only, I, like,
No,
that,
that's different.
That's different.
like,
Right.
just to get clarification.
Because what you're doing is, according to Mr. Rella, you would be breaking, you would be breaking the state requirements. So, and we have had students that have been removed,
And 504, because it would fall under that too, right?
right? It would be
Like,
depending on what
part
the
of their
disability is. Because the only difference between 504 and IP is really, IP doesn't have to be medical, 504 must be medical.
So the other way to think of it is, so if someone's insubordinate, right? So you're not listening to the teacher, you're being
Right.
disrespectful, you're being disrespectful to a bus driver, right? You're not staying in your seat or whatever. That's insubordination, period, end of story. So in school suspension, out of school suspension. So if we suspend somebody out of school, that's also a
That's a
removal
bus.
from a bus for a day.
Correct.
Just by default.
Yeah.
In-school suspension, you can pair that up with, your parents need to drop you off, your parents need to
If
pick
it's,
you up.
especially with a bus
Right.
infraction.
But again, the administrator, when they institute this,
Mhm.
this is a baseline for the decision-making, and it demonstrates progressive discipline, right? Through first offense, second offense, third offense. They can, again, based on the history of the student, based on the specific situation, it's their job to adjust this appropriately as well. So they can make it stricter or weaker as well, so.
Right, and I think the other thing that's important that I started to institute, which I think is very important now that we have a new director, is we need to have quality records and record keeping. So when we have a bus driver, and it happens twice, write the whole bus. We can still get an administrator to get on the bus because they wrote the whole bus. It's appropriate. You know, ladies and gentlemen, or boys and girls, it has been brought to our attention by your bus driver, many of you, not all, many of you are not behaving appropriately, blah, 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 blah. We just had all of our principals do expectation assemblies, which includes the behavior on the bus. We literally just did it a couple of weeks ago. Okay, I had everybody do that. Expectations. The other thing is, we need to hold the children individually accountable. And how do you do that? By having the person In this case, the classroom teacher is the bus driver. So I had a meeting with her today and I said, if you assign this to one of your, she either has a coordinator, a supervisor, or a secretary, the responsibility is they get the referral. The referral comes in, they confirm all the information is correct. The child's name is there, it's being held accountable. They send it to the building. The building then has discipline, whatever that discipline is, by the way, for parents that are watching, and I confirmed this with the attorney, discipline does not necessarily mean suspension. Discipline can mean a conversation with a parent. Discipline means change, we want to change behavior. Okay, there are kids that we can suspend 10 times over, it doesn't mean they're gonna change the behavior. Depending upon the severity of whatever they've done, and then it gets written up and it gets documented. The parent always gets notified, a copy goes home, parent will get notified whether in person sometimes, and then it gets recorded back. What we've been getting is, and I have to use this example, so Dr. Higgins got, how many would you say? 20 referrals that all said,
Not get the bus on time.
and they, and did have individual names?
Yes.
Okay, now, can you imagine Dr. Higgins giving discipline to a child? What that should be is, and he was welcome to do it. He said, I'll be happy to reach out to parents. It was more about a conversation. You know, the bus is something that we provide your child. Your child is part, you know, nothing in isolation, right? Your child is part of 55, there's 56 kids on the bus, 55 other children getting on the bus. Your child did not get, if this happens more than once, they only wait 3 minutes or whatever the time is. But I think the value of the discipline needs to be coordinated with the value of the write-up. The other thing that we started doing is that if a bus driver doesn't write up, but says, I had a problem with 10 kids in the back, I'm not really sure which kids they are. Once they let the principal know, or the vice principal, because they all do duty outside, everybody's outside, they then, the vice principal or principal, will speak directly to the whole bus. They go inside, they now write an email directly to the director. Kindly be advised, at such and such a time and such a day, it was reported to me by your bus driver that half of the bus was not behaving. This is what I did, blah, 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 this is my follow-up. So these are all the things that are happening. But unfortunately, we do have some parents out there that think, just take the kid off the bus. It doesn't really work that way for anybody's child.
Can I ask you a question about that? There are consequences, removal of privileged bus.
We've done
It says the parent has to transport the child to school or find a way to get them to school. What if they can't? And then the kid's absent.
So-
What happens then?
So what we've done, and I can't speak, the elementary is, you want to speak to, and the middle school, high school is different. They find a way, they go with a friend because they are older, but the middle school is really where it's affected in the elementary. What we've done is depending upon, if the behavior was so heinous to remove them from a bus, it would have to be, then we probably would stick to it for, or maybe lessen the amount of time and then give them a different consequence because we really do want them in school. If the behavior was minimal on the bus, but enough to remove them from the bus, but not throwing a water bottle off of it, some of the things that happen, spitting, the things they should be doing, then they can give a different consequence. So the consequence could be in-school suspension, and it could be restorative justice.
So when a parent can't get them to school, you alternate.
We do try, it depends. Now, if a child did something heinous, and we did have one child in particular that was removed, had all bus privileges removed in the middle school from last year, then we say respectfully, this is the sixth, like we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. We don't know what to say at this point. It's almost like they need to be inconvenienced because the child is not behaving. Because I think the other thing that we don't realize when we hear about all these situations and the Facebook comments and the comments of the board is, we're not the parent. We don't raise these children. We do our very best to hold them accountable, to have expectations, to have equity and parity about expectations. But in the end, the children that are doing these heinous activities are not being raised by myself or Dr. Lehman or Dr. Higgins or any of the elementary principals. There has to come a point where we partner with the parent to say, this is unacceptable behavior. These are the consequences that we will do, but the parents need to parent their child. I'm very passionate about that. I'm not saying we don't bear the responsibility of holding children accountable. We absolutely do. But it has to be a partnership, not the bus, you're doing nothing. We're doing plenty, but we don't raise the children. So I thought that was an important statement to make.
There may be, I would say, extenuating circumstances where we would find an alternate transportation situation.
Which we can.
Whether it's,
Small
if it's a student that has an IEP and they needed their own bus in a very extreme situation, like we would do that. And even a general.
We've done that.
student,
Where they can't behave on a bus with 56 children because they cannot
again,
handle.
that's extenuating.
Stimulating.
We've done it.
Massive massive commitment of funds and time and things like that, but, you know, we have a responsibility to get the students to school, especially outside that 2 mile radius, right?
Mhm.
And, we would do everything we could, and it could be a van, you know what I mean? It's not about 54 passenger van,
Right.
one student. You clearly look at, are there other buses that are running by that area that
We
pick
check,
up a student?
that's another thing, we
Is the
change,
trigger-
bus stops sometimes.
Trigger for the student
The
on
children
that
bus.
bus, right? Is it just simply putting him on another 54, him or her on another 54 passenger bus with different students? The trigger's now gone, right? Triggers.
Yeah.
So there's other ways that we can kind of tweak transportation if we had to. But again, that's extreme.
And you said there were some recommendations from elementary?
Yeah, they
So
did.
again, I didn't include it because I
Okay.
didn't want to
But we
confuse
don't
us.
vote on that, right? That's.
No,
part of conduct.
no.
No.
Yeah.
And it's-
I will bring the revisions to curriculum
Okay.
for, just to share.
Right.
Because again, a lot of the revisions, and so the revision process involves teachers,
Mhm.
parents
Mhm.
from the building on the committee with the administration.
Okay.
So and they did it at the elementary level, all 6 schools
Mhm.
did it independently. Then the principals got together and brought all of.
So it's
the feedback
one
from each other.
code of conduct.
Okay,
Have it
that's good.
consistent, and they have the primary and upper elementary lens to it.
Mhm.
A lot of the changes had to do with like updating some of the code of conduct stuff to be more relevant. There were trends in style back in the day not back in the day, even like 5, 6 years ago, that we just need to tweak a little bit. So,
Right, and
update, even the cell phone stuff, they updated technology for the recommendation for what they're gonna look at.
And you have a question?
Yeah, if I can ask them, I know the hour's getting late. but-
Yeah, it's getting late.
I know, so I won't take a lot of
Yeah.
time. But if we extend, as you indicated, every courtesy to these, young people. And I truly believe that each level, elementary, middle school, and high school, you have different circumstances and how kids conduct themselves. And also what is proper, a type of a behavior that is acceptable and not acceptable to that child. So I can see where a high school and the middle school and the elementaries come together and set up guidelines for the
Mhm.
kids.
Mhm.
But at some point, especially at high school, I don't know if you agree with me, Dr.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's stricter
It's really
consequences
every
there.
courtesy to these kids at the high school. And then they have such issues, such impediments, some kids in the butt. Then, at some point, the only answer sometimes is just
remove them.
remove them. You just can't have it any other way.
So I think just to end this conversation is, I think that it's imperative to understand that all these violations or guidelines, sometimes you could be stricter and give a higher consequence, and sometimes based upon the circumstances, you could give a different consequence, and you could also give a lessened consequence. But it's always important that you have communication with parents when children are misbehaving, inconvenience them to a certain extent, come in. I don't know if we have time, because I know it's getting very late.
No, I was gonna say,
So
the
the shall
last
will-
one.
And it's just, we just want to change that one word from shall to may.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Video to
If you're,
video.
if you're comfortable with that, we can have that on for a first reading.
Okay.
All we want to say is, if you change it, from shall,
We had to have a discussion about.
no,
how to
are
be
you
out.
comfortable? If you would want to board up.
Yes.
You know, I sort of overheard the end of.
Because that means we're not getting rid of it. If we have it, we want to do it. If we don't have it, it's not required.
Policy wellness check comes back with to show us which ones have.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
I saw the email, yeah.
but that's all it was.
Yeah, this was a good meeting, though.
Yes, thank you,
And
everyone.
thank you for including the bus. I thought it was appropriate to be in the house.
I think, the public needed to hear it
Yeah.
and,
And they're-
find it,
Right.
because there were concerns.
And I think the other thing that people don't realize is, and I said this at the board meeting, I'll always say this, your children do speak the truth. I won't say they won't when they come home, but just because they tell you Johnny, Joey, Margaret, nothing happened to them, nothing, you're both in education, there are a lot of things that do occur. The children are not always privileged to know what has occurred,
Mhm.
and I think that's important to share.
Because you had mentioned when they leave the house, and when they. come back
Yes.
to the house For high school, or cars, like personal cars, is that excused, like a different thing, because it's not a school owned
Yes.
transportation, but it is them leaving their house on their way to school.
Right, so
But
for
they're not
example,
writing of us.
right, but if they were leaving their house and they pulled over on the side, God forbid, with their car to beat up another high school child,
So that.
I think that's what she's asking,
Talk
not
about-
God forbid they would do that, but I'm just giving you an
Like
example.
leaving the house,
Right.
entering the house.
That would be handled under a different type of discipline. It would not be handled under bus discipline.
Correct.
So yes, they would be on their own until they enter the school campus.
for high school. And
A lot of our students go to work, right? So they're not actually home to home, point to point. It's-
pre-K through 8, door to door. How's that? I qualify. I, it's ridiculous.
Is this up?
No.
Okay. All right, so this concludes our policy meeting for this evening. Thank you.
Okay. So are you moving forward?